What sounds like fiction, but is actually a real historical event. 4 Auschwitz prisoners stole Nazi uniforms and a car. Only one of them was speaking German, so he was wearing the highest rank uniform. When they left the camp, they encountered 2 patrols. First patrol, with some high-ranked guy, just hailed them. Second patrol, with 2 low-ranked soldiers, told them they couldn't leave because of orders, etc. The guy speaking German started screaming at them so loud and so realistically that they just said, "We're sorry, go ahead." So they escaped? Yep. They were shot at a local bar, unfortunately. The high-ranking officer in disguise asked for 3 whiskeys using his fingers, but forgot to use his thumb, which gave him away. During WW1, the German Navy built a ship and painted it to make it look like a British ship called the RMS Carmania in order to infiltrate and destroy British convoys. On the ship's first outing, the first enemy it encountered was the real RMS Carmania, which promptly sunk it. Spider-Man meme. In 2007, a paraglider got trapped in the updraft of 2 joining thunderstorms and was lifted to an altitude of 33,000 feet. She landed over 3 hours later, about 60 kilometers north of her starting position, having survived extreme cold, lightning, and lack of oxygen. That sounds scary. Imagine spending 3 hours in the sky and not being able to get back down. She was unconscious for most of it, thankfully. Jeanne de Clisson, 1300 to 1359, was married to a French nobleman who was beheaded for treason by the French king. Enraged, she sold their estate, purchased 3 black warships with red sails, and became a pirate queen of the English Channel who targeted French ships. She became known as the Lioness of Brittany, and in her 13 years of piracy, she would slaughter every member of a ship's crew, except for one, so that the last survivor could go back and tell the French king what had happened. In the Great Molasses Flood of 1919, a tank filled with 2 million gallons of molasses burst and sent a tidal wave of molasses through the streets of Boston. 21 people were killed. Imagine standing in the streets as a tidal wave of molasses approaches and just thinking to yourself, well, I guess this is how it ends. Death by molasses. I was listening to a podcast about this once, and a little boy watched his mom and his brother drown in the molasses while he tried to surf over to them on a bed that was floating, but he couldn't get over to them fast enough. Also, the people in the town would constantly complain about the tank because they saw it was leaking and might explode. They responded by just painting the tank brown so people wouldn't see it leaking. Apparently, if you go to this spot in Boston in the summer, you can still faintly smell the molasses. Timothy Dexter was frequently given terrible business advice that would somehow, through a stroke of luck, pay off. He sold coal to Newcastle and made a profit. He became insanely wealthy, dressed in a strange manner, and acted weird in the company of the incredibly wealthy elite he had accidentally stumbled into. He spent a lot of time basically gaslighting his own wife for his own amusement. For quite some time, he acted as if she had died and was a ghost, even introducing her to other people as his wife's ghost. He at one point even faked his own death so he could see how people would react at his funeral. He also wrote a book that was a long-winded rant about everything that upset him. The book included no punctuation. He made a second edition with several pages of punctuation attached to the end that the reader could distribute as they saw fit. The escape from Antarctica by the members of the Antarctic expedition, led by Ernest Shackleton. The stuff they went through was unbelievable. Their boat, the Endurance, was crushed by ice floes. They were stranded on the floes for over a year in temperatures well below freezing. They then took 3 boats around 22 feet in length across the Antarctic Ocean, looking for land. There were about 10 men in each boat. They missed reaching land by just a few miles at times. 2/3 of them got stranded on Elephant Island, surrounded by ice, while one of the boats went out in search of rescue. That boat made it through the Drake Passage, one of the deadliest places in the ocean. All but 3 of them got stranded with little food and water, while the 3 men who left became the first people to cross South Georgia on foot. They found civilization, rescued the men who came through the Drake Passage, waited months until they could rescue those on Elephant Island. Every single person who came on the initial voyage survived, with the worst lasting consequence being a single foot amputation. I am shocked that this has not been made into a major movie or miniseries. There is a fantastic documentary called The Endurance. The trip was partially funded through shooting wildlife footage, so they happened to have cameras. Unbelievable images of their experience. Highly recommended. An English king named Ethelred, later called the Unready, took some troops to defend against a Viking invasion. The weather was bad, so a lot of the Vikings' ships crashed as they were landing. Ethelred thought that it would be dishonorable to attack them as they were stumbling onto shore, so he kept his troops back until the Vikings had a chance to get together and form proper battle lines before he attacked them. The better prepared Vikings then won the fight and slaughtered a bunch of Ethelred's men, and he and the rest were forced to run away while the Vikings went around pillaging. Also, his sobriquet does not mean unready in the modern sense, as in unprepared, but rather ill-advised. Ethelred the name, meaning well-advised, a hilarious pun. The battle for Castle Itter, near the end of WWW, saw US soldiers, French POWs, and the German army fighting on the same side to hold the castle against an SS tank division. To make it even weirder, the French prisoners included several prime ministers and a tennis star. A tennis star, 2 prime ministers, 2 French generals, a former SS officer, and Charles de Gaulle's sister. Someone get Tarantino on the phone. He needs to work on this. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a novel in 1838 in which 4 shipwrecked survivors, at the point of starvation, chose to resort to cannibalism. So they kill the young cabin boy, Richard Parker, and eat him. In 1884, a ship called the Mignonette sank. 4 crew members survived. At the point of starvation, they killed and ate the youngest of them, Richard Parker. The inspiration for the tiger's name in Life of Pi. Jack, a baboon who was employed to change rail signals. After initial skepticism, the railway decided to officially employ Jack once his job competency was verified. The baboon was paid 20 cents a day and a half bottle of beer each week. It is widely reported that in his 9 years of employment with the railroad, Jack never made a mistake. An official investigation was initiated after a concerned member of the public reported that a baboon was observed changing railway signals at Uitenhage near Port Elizabeth. Can you fucking imagine this? Yes, in my mind I'm imagining a drunk man on the train. He looks out the window, sees the baboon, and looks back inside. Suddenly, shakes his head in disbelief, and looks outside again. Sure enough, the baboon is right there. He looks at the bottle in his hand, and then begins to pour it out. Mad Jack Churchill, the man with the only confirmed longbow kill in WW2. Guy and his squad did a death march towards the Germans while playing bagpipes got captured and sent to a concentration camp. He then escaped, got caught again, and then escaped to a different concentration camp. Also, he always carried a Scottish longsword with him. There's so much other weird shit he did after the war, and it's amazing to me that he's entirely real. If you think Mad Jack Churchill was crazy, go read up on Adrian Carton de Wyatt. This man bit his own finger off to get back into combat, swam away from a plane crash one-handed, and considered a war in which he was shot in the head and lost a hand and an eye to have been good fun. Louis XIX was King of France for 20 minutes. The shortest war ever recorded was around 40 minutes long. During the Salem witch trials, dogs were also accused of witchcraft. 2 dogs were executed because of it. The CIA was researching psychic abilities for 30 years as a way to spy on the USSR. After 30 years, the program was terminated, and their conclusion was that psychic powers probably didn't exist. Edit. The actual conclusion was that the evidence for remote viewing was unfalsifiable, and therefore unprovable. Many of the more promising results were believed to be caused by information leakage, meaning that test subjects had prior knowledge about the subject they were asked about. They were unable to verify any of their results because of this, and even if the psychic abilities were real, they were unreliable at best. Edit 2. The code name for the project was Stargate. You can find the documents on the CIA website. The life of Harriet Tubman is one of the rare examples of someone who is a household name for being a badass, who was actually about 10 times more badass than people know about. Things she did other than the Underground Railroad. She financed and recruited for John Brown's Harper's Ferry slave revolt raid, and the only reason she didn't fight in person, as she was bedridden with malaria. During the Civil War, she joined the Union Army as a cook nurse. She somehow class shifted into a spy scout and helped Union leaders plan raids into Confederate territory, and she assassinated several Confederates. She rose in the ranks until she commanded a small raiding force of 300 Union troops from the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment, the second black U.S. Army unit ever. Her command, Company C, 54th, raided southern plantations, slaughtered slave drivers, and freed captive slaves. In the Combahee Ferry raid, where the 54th freed 700 slaves, she was also in command of 3 Union frigates, and when a Confederate division was advancing on them, she fired broadsides from the 3 naval warships directly into the enemy troops. She survived the war and immediately turned around and started fighting for women's suffrage. Why don't they teach this in school? That is insane. Edit. Have learned about the Underground Railroad and was referring to the rest.